everyone, it's John from What Up, and welcome back to another video. I have a very special guest today, Mr. Green. He is a fantasy author and also host of Easing the Reader, a Wheel of Time podcast. He's here to talk about his brand new book that is released today, and then after we're done chatting about the book, we're going to chat about Wheel of Time just for a little bit. So, if you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about your writing career and what your new book is all about.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. Anyway, this is great. It's always nice to talk to you as well. I've been writing a little bit of other things for a while, like short stories and like mainly kind of horror and sci-fi kind of things. But I always harbored ambitions to be a fantasy writer because that's what I read growing up, but it scared me as well because I was like, I don't think I'm good enough of a writer to write anything that's fantasy because it's really hard. And that was one of the things that used to really kind of like frustrate me as a reader, where you'd see people kind of like talking down about fantasy, like, oh, it's only fantasy and all that kind of stuff. It's really hard.
You have to write an encyclopedia and draw maps and have everything already go and a whole world built for you to start most of the time.
Exactly, yeah. And like, so I was always kind of like, when I only started kind of publishing my work a few years, well, 2 years actually. I'm over exaggerating. Last year actually was when I started kind of getting stuff kind of published after doing like a lot of stuff like online and what have you for a while. And every time I was writing something for it was getting more towards fantasy. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try. So I did a short story, a fantasy short story called Master and Apprentice, which got published in a fantasy anthology. So I was like, right, okay, let's push it a little bit more next time. So I did a series that's called the Nick Halloran series, which is like kind of paranormal detective. It's an urban fantasy noir kind of thing. I would class it as fantasy, but a lot of other people say it's like a paranormal kind of horror kind of thing. But for me, it's got a lot of fantasy elements in it. And then so that went down well, and I was like, right, okay, I've got an idea, and I'm going to try it, and we'll see if anyone is interested, and see if they can actually do it as well. So I started working on this, which is in Solitudes Shadow. I think if you can see it, there we go, which is just out today. This is the cover. So I started working on this from this time last year, and I had the idea for a long time because it was being a big fantasy nut. I was kind of like, I have these ideas, like things that I would like to have seen that I hadn't kind of come across in stuff that I'd read. So I started writing it this time last year, and did the first draft, showed it to some people. They didn't say I was an idiot, so that was good. I was like, well, this is encouraging. So I did another kind of draft on it, and then I sent it to some publishers, and it got accepted quite quickly actually. And then we spent a bit more time kind of refining it, working on it. We had a release date, and we were kind of doing all the exciting things like covers and all that kind of stuff, and just still working on the book, just kind of getting the fine details. And the story never really changed, but it just kind of went a bit like deeper through the process. So it was like that world building aspect. So like almost a year to the day from when I started working on it, so which is really quick actually when you think about it. Like Wheel of Time by the World, it was what, 1983, 1984 when he started writing it.
Before it was published, after he started writing it, yeah.
Yeah. So it's it's been quite quick compared to that, but obviously it's not as big as Wheel of Time. So it's not as big as
it will be.
Yeah, well, you never know.
That's the hope anyway.
Yeah, well, definitely not in word count. Like I think that this one is like it's probably about the same size as New Spring.
Okay.
So it'd be like, which I always used to laugh because like Robert Jordan described that as a novella, and it's like it's not a novella.
It's a novel. Well, it'll be like when Stephen King writes a novella. It's bigger than most people's novels.
Exactly. So maybe one day I might do something like Way of the King sized or something, but
you have already been working on book 2, haven't you?
Yeah, book 2 is book 2 is it's almost done actually now. Book 2, because it's out in September, so we're doing a really, really quick release schedule on this because that's kind of the taste these days, that people kind of want. They finish the first one, they want that second one, and you know what it's like as well, being a fantasy fan, you kind of want to dive straight into the next one. So we're looking to do the whole. It's a trilogy, like, and it was set out as a trilogy at the start, and it will only be a trilogy. So it's like there don't be any extra books going. Well, I've got ideas for other books set afterwards that are in the same world, but not for this story. So it's going to be today, September for the second one, and December for the third one.
Nice. Can you give us a little taste, a synopsis of what the book's about?
Yeah, so the book is called In Solitudes Shadow, and it's the Empire of Ruin, book one. And basically, what it is it's kind of, I mean, it's a lot of my love of fantasy. It's a dark fantasy. It's very character driven. So it's an ensemble cast. So there's not one main protagonist. It follows a group of people that some of them have ties to each other and some of them don't. But the main thrust in the story is an estranged mother and daughter. And the reason why they're estranged and the decision on it, and a lot of characters in the book agree with one of them or the other. And it's one of those things that when the reviews have been coming in, people have been like, I love this because I can see both points of view on this. It's not something that's like, this person's
not black and
wrong.
white, it's all a little grey.
Yeah, all little bits of grey. And this is kind of set upon this backdrop of this empire that's kind of loosely based on the Roman Empire when they were expanding rapidly, but instead of where the Roman Empire was when they take over a new country or culture, they'd absorb that into their kind of tapestry. This empire just obliterates everything in its path. It's like it's just built on war, it's built on a machine, and it's built on this kind of we're as strong as our weakest link, so we can't have a weak link. And their kind of ethos is that they need an enemy to be always fighting against, because it keeps them strong, and it also keeps the people that live in this empire pliable. It's like, well, we're at war, so you let us do what we're going to do, and you'll be fine with this because we're trying to protect you. So it's set against this kind of backdrop where there's an invasion coming from this race of this older race of people set in this country that's already kind of in the midst of a civil war, and basically it's set in a big time of change where there's like a recently crowned emperor is trying to really kind of put his own stamp onto the empire. And so there's lots of different changes. There's quite a lot of politics in it, but the main kind of thrust is this relationship between parents, because like two of the sets of characters are mother and daughter and father and son.
Oh, very good.
And the name In Solitude Shadow, like there's a place called Solitude, but it's also like that's a big theme of the book. If I can be very arty and talk about theme, which I hate doing because I hear myself doing it and I'm like, what are you talking about?
That's good. I can't wait to read it. I know my copy's on the way right now, so I should be able to read it soon. So for you folks watching, if you want to order a copy of David's book, it's there's a link down below in the description box. You can click that, follow that, and order your copies of his book there. I've also left a link to his podcast, Easing the Reader, which is a really, really cool Wheel of Time podcast. And you may or may not see yours truly on it a couple times here and there. Once in a while. It's always great fun to go on with David. It's a good time.
Yeah, and like, the last time you were on, it was voice only. We just heard you.
I was stuck at work, and I couldn't do video, so voice only. But it was a good time. I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, you were like the creator.
Pants.
Well, neither am I. You were like the creator. It was just your voice just coming from nowhere. It's like every time you spoke, we were like, whoa.
Where's it coming from? All right, so we're going to dive a little bit into Wheel of Time now. We'll talk just a bit about that. But before we do, spoiler warning, we're going to talk about elements of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. So if you haven't already read at least, and I say at least, but that's a terrible way of putting it, all of the books, because we're going to spoil all of the things, most likely in what we're talking about here. So that's all the way up to and including A Memory of Light. Be forewarned, we may ruin some plot points and major character arcs for you.
Yes.
All right, so now the little spoiler thing's gone. It's their faces again. So as a writer, this is a question I always want to ask writers, because we see, and you see it too as being part of the Wheel of Time fandom, they're making the show right now. And so let's fast forward a few years in the future, and let's say they make a show out of your book series. How would you feel about changes to it? So, because you see I see it all the time in the comments of my videos and on Twitter, and especially on Reddit. Reddit and Facebook are really bad for this, where people say they're ruining his vision, he wouldn't allow this to happen, and they get very, very upset about any of the small changes, the way a dagger looks, for example, a guitar rather than a harp. And they don't stop to think that his widow, as well as the person who wrote the last 3 books, approve of these changes, and they're involved in the show. They just think that in their own mind that nothing should be changed ever. So as a writer, you create something. What's your take on if it's brought to a different medium, if they have to change some things?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because you do see some writers. Alan Moore springs to mind, who just hates all of his adaptations. It's just like, and with good reason in some of them. Some of his adaptations are just not great, but some of them are good, I think. And it's kind of a bit unfair. But the way I like, great, where can I sign? And I would like to have input into it. It would be nice to kind of check some things, but I think with my background, I studied film at university. So like, that was what I wanted to do when I was younger. I wanted to get into the film, but it was at the time when I was doing it, which was the early 2000s in England, there was only one film school. It was like very, very expensive and all this kind of stuff. So it just never happened. But I have done screenplays and I have adapted books for screenplays as well. And it's difficult. It's really, really hard. And that's with something that a couple of things that I've worked on are books that I have no kind of attachment to. It's just something that it was a job and I just read it and I was like, yeah, okay, let's break this down and do it. And I work with a writer. And you do get into arguments with them. And so it's like, well, this is, because it's a completely different medium. And one thing where it will work in book will not work on the screen. And I always think the Lord of the Rings films is a great example. People always talk about how it's like such a great adaptation. It isn't. I mean, the films are brilliant.
It's not at all.
No. Well, and when some people talk of great, I mean, when people say great adaptations, I mean, there's 2 different things. I mean, it's like, it's either, is it faithful or does it work?
Yeah.
Like The Lord of the Rings is not faithful, it works though, and especially The Two Towers, which is completely different to the books, the middle book of The Two Towers. I mean, the whole Aragorn and the character of Aragorn is very different in the films as well than it is in the books. But it works in the films and it's satisfying. Yeah, so I think it's one of those things you kind of have to look at it and say, yeah, the books are always going to be there; they're never going to go. And when they bring out those new covers that have got like the tie-ins, which is going to be happening in the Wheel of Time later on this year, maybe November.
Early November, I believe. Yeah.
There we go. They'll have this lovely new cover with Rosamund Pike on it, probably, and Daniel Henney, and if you're going to get it in Spain, it'll have Legain will be on the front of it probably. But the actual book will be the exact same as it always has been.
Yeah.
The TV show is going to be different, and that's because it has to be. I mean, they say like. Some things are written, more modern things are written in a more cinematic kind of way, because I think people have that kind of thing in the back of their mind when they're writing it, and because it's newer writers as well that sort of been more exposed to TV and movies, they have that in the back of their mind where it's like, how does this look? And that's very much how I would write it. It's that I picture the scene in my mind and I'm like, okay, let's try and write it how I see it. Whereas something like Eye of the World, for example, was started writing it nearly 40 years ago. So it's a long time ago. Like,
I'm old.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long time ago he started writing it, and things have changed, and the writing style has changed. So like the way that he has written some sequences in that all the stops on the road has been one big example.
Yeah, or the one I really like to use a lot is the inner monologues. There's a lot of inner monologues in the Wheel of Time, just in general, all the way through, and they don't work. Not really well, anyway, on the screen. At least not to that extent.
No, and the other thing as well, and it's something that he gets out of as his kind of writing style develops and taste change, is that especially in the Eye of the World, there's a lot of info dumps where it's a character that will be like, you sit down and I will tell you how this works. And it happens quite a lot. You can think of Moraine at the start telling the story of Manor Ferren and all this kind of stuff. Like, she's just basically just for pages, she's just telling them this story. It's great to read, but in a TV show, it doesn't work because you need to have that interaction and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's different. I think things that have been written more modern, I think they're easier in a way to adapt than older things, and obviously the older things are more beloved as well, so you have that attachment to it. But I think if you keep the spirit of the thing correct, then that's fine. And if I was to say this was getting adapted by someone, and I sat down with them and spoke to it, and there was a big change about something, but they understood the kind of, they could say to me, well, this is because of this, and it's got the spirit of the book correct, and I'd be like, well, fine, it's a different thing, it's a different medium, this is your take on it, I'm just happy, let's do it.
I'm just happy you're happy.
Yeah, if it was something that was like completely just off kilter and just didn't make any sense to the world or to the characters, and I kind of thought, like, no, that's not the right spirit, then it would be something that I would kind of argue about. And I've had that discussion with people when I've been adapting stuff where I've left out a scene or I've changed a scene, and they've been like, well, this is the reason why, and this is this, and it means a lot to me, is, whatever. And it's like, okay, well, you have to take that on board and kind of see what you can do with it. But yeah, I wouldn't like to be in a writer's room adapting something, because I say it's difficult to do it when it's something that you haven't got an attachment to. But if I was having to adapt The Wheel of Time, I think I would have a nervous breakdown.
Well, it's so big. There's so many changes, and there's the butterfly effect too. You change one small thing in the first book, and then that could completely change entire plot lines later on. So it's got to be stressful. But I think what's more stressful is dealing with the fans, because there are so many fans that are, and I hate using the word, but it's the word I'll use, purists. They think that they read the book, it's exactly how it is on print. It should be word for word, shot for shot, scene for scene, the way it is on screen. We would have 20 episodes in the first season, and no one would watch it. It would be in like, reading it is fine, and it's exciting and it's nice and it's good. It works that way, but watching it on TV would probably be boring if it was exactly the same. And confusing, very confusing.
And very confusing. Yeah. I mean, you have to have conflicts, and you have to have stakes, and that's one of the things that, especially, I mean, in any kind of writing, but especially in TV, and it's particularly in TV, because especially old style TV before streaming, when it was like split into quarters because of adverts and everything, it was like you had a specific thing you had to write for. It had to be a 15-minute chunk of setup, conflict, tension, resolution, cliffhanger. Yeah. And that was the way it would have to have been. It's different now with streaming, because obviously you have that thing where it's like, and this is one of the interesting things, is I wonder how early that they settled on how this was going to be released, if it was going to be a weekly or if it was going to be,
which they
because that changes the way you write.
So. Yeah? They haven't told us yet that either. So
they haven't told us, no. But I wonder how early that was decided, because it does change the way that you write. Because if it was, you can see a big difference in Netflix shows that are all dumped on, to say dumped, it sounds like a terrible thing, but they're all kind of put out on day one because people are going to binge it, because they can have those very introspective episodes where it's like nothing happens, but it's like it's all character driven.
Filler episodes that give you key information, but they're not super exciting.
Yeah, because they know that people are going to watch it and then watch the next one, then watch the next one. And I think they did a study in Netflix, and they're like, normally when they drop something on the first day, all in one season, people on average watch three episodes. That was the thing that they I think that's why Amazon started doing the 3 episode thing, and then
3, and then they go weekly afterwards, which is what they've done the last little bit. And I actually am kind of hoping they just go full weekly. And that's purely selfish, so I can make content in between. That's the only reason.
Yeah, well, me too as well, though. Because I think one of the reasons why is because the change of writing style. Because if you're doing it, it's more disciplined, because then it has to be, every episode has to count, and it has to be something that it has to have that kind of structure as well. Structure is important in writing. Like, it's good to break structure sometimes, or do something new. But when you do something that hasn't got the structure, it alarms people. It's like, what is happening?
All right, so before we head out here, before we finish this episode, is there anything else you want to tell the viewers about your book? Maybe like a short little soundbite that'll entice them to click that button and buy it.
That's you put me on the spot.
Oh, right on the spot too.
It's really good now. I got one review. I got some great reviews for it actually, but one review said it stands apart from any mainstream or independent fantasy that they've read in the last 5 years. So, if you want to know why it stands apart, then there's only one way to find out. It does something that I always wanted to see in fantasy. It explores a few different areas that I hadn't really seen myself. So it's quite unique, and obviously being a Wheel of Time fan, as everyone that's watching this is, you will see like there is homages and a lot of love for the Wheel of Time in this as well. And I've kind of done what Robert Jordan did, whereas I've taken things that people are kind of familiar with to ease them in a little bit, and then just done something different with them. So hopefully people agree with me.
I hope so too. I'm sure they will. So like I said, the link to his book is down below in the description box. The link to the podcast as well, Easing the Reader, down below in the description box. Go over and download the podcast. It's a really, really good podcast. It's two published writers talking about the Wheel of Time from a writer's perspective. Like I said, they do have some special guests once in a while. They had me on there a few times. They had Matt Hatch from the Dusty Wheel, and they get our perspectives as well when we come in. And it's always a great time to be there, and it's a really good podcast as well. So go check that out. All right.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for being with me here today, David. I appreciate it, and here's to many more.
Thank you. See you soon.
See you soon.